The first prototype rolled off a low-volume assembly line in Aichi Prefecture late last year, and almost nobody outside Toyota's engineering division paid attention. It was a small sedan, painted a flat industrial silver, and it carried no badging beyond a temporary identification sticker taped to the inside of the windshield. Engineers walked around it with clipboards. A senior battery specialist crouched near the rear axle, listening to the faint hum of the cooling pump as the vehicle idled in standby mode. There were no journalists present. There was no announcement. And yet, within the careful choreography of that quiet morning, a strategic shift was beginning to take shape, one that would, over the following months, force analysts in Shenzhen, Mumbai, Fremont, and Wolfsburg to revise their forecasts for the second half of the decade. For most of the last 10 years, Toyota has been described, often unfairly, as the company that missed the electric revolution. The accusation was rooted in something real. While Tesla scaled the Model 3 into a global phenomenon, while BYD quietly overtook Volkswagen in Chinese market share, and while Tata Motors built an aggressive electric portfolio under the Nexon and Punch nameplates, Toyota continued to insist that hybrid powertrains, hydrogen fuel cells, and incremental electrification represented a more rational pathway than full battery commitment. Akio Toyoda, then chairman, repeatedly argued that a single technology future was a fragile future. Critics called it stubbornness. Shareholders called it conservative. Competitors, in private, called it a gift. But beneath that public posture, something else was happening. Toyota's research arm, working in collaboration with Panasonic, Idemitsu Kosan, and a network of university laboratories in Nagoya and Kyoto, had spent nearly a decade refining the chemistry, the manufacturing tolerances, and the supply economics of a vehicle that could be sold profitably in emerging markets at a price point the rest of the industry considered structurally impossible. The figure the company eventually settled on, somewhere near 23,000 United States dollars before incentives, was not chosen for marketing impact. It was chosen because it represented the threshold at which an electric vehicle could displace a combustion vehicle in households, earning between $8,000 and $20,000 a year, the demographic that will define global automotive demand for the next 2 decades. To understand why this matters, it helps to step back from the headlines and look at the actual structure of the world's car market. Roughly 78 million passenger vehicles are sold each year. Of those, fewer than 15% are sold in markets where the average household can comfortably afford a vehicle priced above $35,000. The vast remainder, the markets in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Latin America, North Africa, and parts of Eastern Europe, operate on margins so thin that a $1,000 swing in sticker price can determine whether a model succeeds or disappears. Tesla, for all its brand power, has never seriously competed in these segments. BYD has tried, with the Seagull and the Dolphin Mini, and has succeeded primarily inside China, where domestic subsidies and a vertically integrated battery supply chain compress costs in ways foreign manufacturers cannot easily replicate. Tata has done remarkable work in India, but its volume remains constrained by the size of the Indian middle class and the limits of charging infrastructure outside major metropolitan areas. Toyota's calculation was that the next great expansion of electric vehicles would not come from convincing wealthy buyers to upgrade. It would come from offering working-class families a vehicle whose total cost of ownership, including electricity, maintenance, and depreciation, undercut the small petrol cars that currently dominate those markets. The Corolla, the Etios, the Vios, the Yaris, vehicles that have defined Toyota's presence in the developing world for 30 years, were the benchmarks. The new electric model, internally referenced by a project code rather than a public name during its development, was engineered to slot into that same competitive space without requiring buyers to compromise on range, durability, or service network access. The technical decisions behind the vehicle reveal a great deal about how Toyota reached its price target. Rather than pursuing the high energy density nickel manganese cobalt chemistry that dominates premium electric vehicles, the engineering team committed to lithium iron phosphate cells produced in a partnership facility in Fukuoka. Lithium iron phosphate, often abbreviated as LFP, has lower energy density than its nickel-based counterparts, which means a slightly heavier battery pack for the same range, but it offers three advantages that prove decisive. It is significantly cheaper to manufacture. It tolerates a much wider range of operating temperatures, which matters enormously in markets like Indonesia or Nigeria, where ambient heat can exceed 40 degrees Celsius for months at a time, and it has a substantially longer cycle life, meaning the battery can endure more charge and discharge events before its capacity degrades to a point where replacement becomes necessary. The vehicle's range, according to internal testing data that has circulated among suppliers, sits between 300 and 340 kilometers on a single charge under realistic urban driving conditions. That figure is modest by the standards of a Tesla Model Y or a BYD Han, but it is more than adequate for the daily mobility patterns of the buyers Toyota is targeting. Studies conducted by the International Energy Agency over the past 5 years have repeatedly shown that the median daily driving distance in cities like Bangkok, Jakarta, Lagos, and Sao Paulo falls below 40 kilometers. A vehicle with a 300-kilometer range, charged 2 or 3 times a week, fits that pattern without anxiety. The motor architecture is similarly pragmatic. A single permanent magnet synchronous motor drives the front wheels, producing roughly 120 kilowatts of peak output. There is no all-wheel drive option in the base configuration. There is no performance variant. The vehicle accelerates from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in approximately 9 seconds, which is faster than the combustion sedans it is designed to replace, and slower than anything sold in the premium electric segment. Toyota's engineers were explicit in the few technical briefings that have been shared with industry analysts that they were not building a car to impress journalists on a closed test track. They were building a car that could be repaired by an independent mechanic in a town 300 kilometers from the nearest authorized dealer, using tools and diagnostic equipment that already exist in those markets. This last point deserves elaboration because it touches on something the electric vehicle industry has consistently underestimated. In wealthy countries, the dealership and service network for electric vehicles can be built around proprietary diagnostic software, certified technicians, and regional service centers. In emerging markets, that model collapses. A buyer in rural Vietnam or interior Brazil cannot wait 4 weeks for a specialist to arrive from the capital. The vehicles that succeed in those markets are the ones whose major components can be serviced locally, whose spare parts can be sourced through existing distribution channels, and whose failure modes are predictable enough that an experienced mechanic can diagnose problems without specialized equipment. Toyota's reputation in these markets was built on exactly that kind of mechanical accessibility, and the engineering brief for the new electric model required that the same principle be preserved. Achieving that meant making certain choices that more aggressive competitors have avoided. The vehicle uses a relatively conventional 12-volt auxiliary system, allowing standard automotive electrical components to be used throughout the cabin. The high-voltage battery pack is divided into modular sections, each of which can be independently diagnosed and, if necessary, replaced without dismantling the entire pack. The thermal management system relies on liquid cooling but uses a coolant chemistry that is widely available rather than a proprietary blend. Even the charging port follows the most common regional standards rather than a Toyota-specific connector, a deliberate departure from the closed ecosystems some competitors have constructed. The implications for BYD, Tata, and Tesla are not identical, and it is worth examining them separately. For BYD, the threat is the most direct. The Chinese manufacturer has built its global expansion strategy around offering vehicles that are roughly 10 to 15% cheaper than Western or Japanese alternatives while delivering comparable specifications. If Toyota can match BYD's price in the entry-level segment while leveraging a service network that, in Southeast Asia and Latin America, is decades older and far more deeply rooted than BYD's, the Chinese company's primary competitive advantage erodes substantially. BYD's response, judging by recent announcements about expanded production in Brazil, Thailand, and Hungary, appears to be to accelerate localization in order to maintain the cost gap. Whether that strategy will hold depends on factors beyond pricing, including political relationships, tariff structures, and the durability of Chinese battery supply chains under increasing geopolitical pressure. For Tata, the situation is more nuanced. The Indian manufacturer has the home market advantage that Toyota will struggle to overcome quickly. India's import duties, its preference for domestically produced vehicles in government fleet purchases, and the deep familiarity Indian buyers have with the Tata brand all create barriers that even a well-priced Toyota import cannot easily breach. However, Toyota's joint venture with Suzuki and its existing manufacturing presence in Karnataka suggest a pathway toward local production that could neutralize some of those barriers within 3 to 5 years. Tata's window to consolidate its electric leadership in India is real but narrowing, and the company's recent investments in battery cell manufacturing in Gujarat indicate that its leadership understands the timeline. For Tesla, the impact is more strategic than immediate. Tesla does not compete in the $23,000 segment and has shown little interest in doing so. Elon Musk has spoken publicly about a more affordable Tesla model for years, and the project has alternated between active development and indefinite delay multiple times. The deeper threat to Tesla is not that Toyota will steal its customers in California or Norway. It is that the global narrative around electric vehicle leadership is shifting. For a decade, Tesla has been positioned in the public imagination and in the financial markets as the company defining the future of automotive technology. If that future is increasingly written in the form of affordable, reliable, mass-market vehicles produced by traditional manufacturers in volumes Tesla cannot match, the premium valuation that has supported Tesla's stock price for years becomes harder to justify. The market may not react immediately, but analysts at firms like Bernstein and UBS have already begun adjusting their long-term models. There are, of course, reasons for caution. $23,000 is the announced target price, but announced prices and final retail prices are not the same thing. Toyota will need to navigate fluctuating lithium and copper costs, currency volatility in the markets where the vehicle will be sold, and the inevitable engineering compromises that emerge during the transition from prototype to mass production. The first generation of any new vehicle platform tends to reveal problems that did not appear in testing, and Toyota's reputation for reliability, while well-earned, has been bruised in recent years by quality control issues at its Daihatsu subsidiary and by software-related recalls in some of its hybrid models. There is also the question of charging infrastructure. A vehicle priced for emerging markets is only useful if those markets have the electrical infrastructure to support widespread adoption. In some countries, that infrastructure is developing rapidly. Thailand, Vietnam, and Mexico have all expanded public charging networks significantly over the past 3 years. In others, including large parts of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, the grid itself remains unreliable, and a meaningful electric vehicle rollout will require coordinated investment from governments, utilities, and private operators. Toyota cannot solve that problem alone, and the success of its new model will depend in part on how those external developments unfold. What is clear, even with these uncertainties acknowledged, is that something has shifted in the structure of the electric vehicle industry. For most of the past decade, the conversation has been dominated by questions of technology, range, performance, and brand. The next decade will be defined by a different set of questions, ones concerned with affordability, durability, and access. Toyota's announcement, understated as it has been by the company's own communication standards, signals that the manufacturer most often accused of moving too slowly has, in fact, been preparing for this moment longer than its competitors realized. In a small showroom in suburban Bangkok, where vehicles are typically displayed beneath fluorescent lights with handwritten price tags taped to the windshields, the first units of the new model are expected to arrive within the year. Customers walking in to look at them will not be experiencing a revolution in the way the technology press tends to describe revolutions. They will be experiencing something quieter and, in the long run, more consequential. They will be looking at a car they can actually afford, built by a company they already trust, powered by a technology that, until recently, seemed reserved for someone else. This shift will not happen all at once, but it has already begun, and the industry that emerges on the other side will look different from the one we have spent the last 10 years arguing about.